50% of men in the United States are at 28% of body fat or higher. And more than 50% of the women in the United States are at 40% of body fat or higher. The overweight and the obesity crisis in the United States is real, and many of you have tried to lose weight and failed. This video will hopefully give you some insight of what you can do to get to a healthy body fat range and also to stay there. I want you to understand the basics, the big ticket items. And this video is structured in several sections. In the first section, we're talking about how do you estimate how much weight you actually have to lose. In the second section, we talk about caloric maintenance and exercise. In the third section, we're talking about your diet. The fourth section will talk about other factors that are important. And then in the last section, we will of course always ask the question, what does it actually mean for you? Let's talk about your body fat. So let's say your goal is to be at 20% for men, right? And you're currently a 50% body fat type. If you look at this picture, you would fall into the left category. So don't underestimate this transformation. This will be most likely one of the largest things you've ever done, besides maybe buying a house and besides starting a family, which means there will be a lot of change coming your way. Your colleague or your friend or your family member who is at 20% body fat most likely has a completely different diet than you, most likely has made very conscious choices on exercise and food, and most likely also has different genetics. So it is possible for you to get there, but you will have to do a lot of change, most likely. So now, how do you know how much weight to lose? So let's assume you weigh 220 pounds at 50% of body fat, and you're a man, which means about 50% of your weight is fat, right? So around 110 pounds of you is fat. So now you want to get close to 20% to like a healthy range of body fat. The math is pretty simple, which means 20% body fat is 0.4 times the 110 pounds of body fat that you have. So in other words, 20% body fat would mean roughly around 44 pounds of fat, right? So now that math is a little bit off because you're of course losing also weight, but it's a good goal setter for you, right? In other words, you would need to lose roughly around 66 pounds of body fat at a healthy rate of losing body fat, which is around 1 to 1.5 pounds of body fat per week. That will take you around 44 to 66 weeks. I put this into this graph to give you a good idea how much body fat you will have to lose and how much time it might take you at a healthy range of losing body fat. The same is true for women. Visualize yourself and compare yourself to those pictures. Be honest to yourself, right? You want to know where you're at the moment, where on the scale do you fall. For women, the body fat range is usually higher. It's somewhere around the 30% range is a healthy body fat range for women. Obesity and overweight associated with a range of chronic diseases and of course also a lot of discomfort, right? The question becomes, what are the key ingredients for sustainable weight loss? Let's start with the first one, exercise. The first thing I want to mention is how important exercising is for sustainable weight loss and also for sustainable weight management. I am a former athlete, so I might have somewhat screwed sense of that. I'm basically working out almost every day since I was 16 years old. For most of my time, I did cardio. I was a racing cyclist. I was a runner. I did some martial arts. And just recently, I started lifting weights around 2 years ago at the age of 45. At the moment, I do a good mix of cardio and resistant training. It's very ingrained into my biorhythm, my day and my life, right? Most people do not have a 30-year plus history of exercising every day. So like the point I'm trying to make is that losing weight only on a diet is very possible, right? But it's also hard. And if you have the goal to go to 20%, it will become a lot easier for you if you do some sort of frequent exercise. Best would be a mix of cardio and resistance training that is becoming part of your life. Why is this important? For once, on a weight loss journey, you're not just losing fat, you also lose muscle. And in some cases, especially if you don't exercise and you're not accustomed to exercise, as much as 40 or 50% of the weight that you're losing is actually not coming from fat, but it's coming from muscle tissue. So first of all, that's not good, right? You want to retain your muscle tissue because you need mobility. You also want to reduce your visceral fat because that fat causes inflammation and not your muscle tissue. The other issue is also if your body loses too much muscle, It will become a lot harder to control your hunger because your body wants to rebuild that muscle. And lastly, your muscles also burn calories, right? The more muscle you have, the easier it is to stay in a certain amount of body fat. So now the question becomes, what exercise is great, right? And for most people, any type of movement will do, right? But especially cardio can also trigger hunger and fatigue that can offset some of the calories that you burn through the cardio. So it is important to slowly increase your exercise. I'm not saying don't do cardio. I think cardio is extremely important, but it's as important to increase your exercise. For many, that might just start with a daily walk, right? A great range of steps, for example, will be somewhere between 7 and 10,000 steps per day, and 15,000 if you're more advanced. I can give you an example. When I was a racing athlete 20 years ago, a 1.5 hour bike ride was actually a rest day for me, and a 7-hour bike ride through the mountains, that was a long, exhausting training day. Today, like 20 plus years later, a 1-hour run is all I need. For most people, it is important to exercise frequently. Try to make this a weekly routine. Start slowly and try to work your way up. The best would be to work with a certified trainer if you never have exercised before. And then lastly, exercising also builds community. I made a lot of friends over my time exercising, and it will help you to stay focused on your goals. And that is extremely important. It also increases endorphin levels and it helps you with cardiovascular issues. And last but not least, it will help you to retain muscle and shift your weight loss to more fat loss and less muscle loss. The second point I want to make is your diet. I think what a lot of people misunderstand is that losing weight and dieting is the notion that it has to be for some reason unjoyful, or you even have to go on some ridiculous diet like the carnivore diet, for example, which is absolutely not true, right? What is true is that you need to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight. Where a lot of people struggle is to understand what their caloric needs actually are, right? And really, a very rough estimate, you can take your current body weight, let's say 220, right, pounds, and multiply it by 10 to 13, depending on how active you are. You would be in the multiplied by 10 if you're not very active, you sit around all day and you're having a desk job, and you would multiply it more by 12 or 13 if you're more active. That's a pretty vague estimate, and I would not recommend to do that long term. It probably gets you started, but if you're 200, 300, 400 calories off, that can make all the difference between losing weight and gaining weight. A lot better would be to count the calories and weigh yourself every day. And then if you do this for a month or two, it took me about a month when I started my weight loss journey. And if over time your weight goes up, then you know you're eating too much. So you have to reduce your food. And if your weight goes down, you are in a caloric deficit, right? So that's also not exact. For example, when I started my weight loss journey, I was around 2,200 calories to be in a deficit, and I was gaining when I ate 2,500 plus. So this was for me a good estimate of how many calories I needed to eat to lose weight. So this number also changes because you're losing weight, so your body needs less calories over time. So you're going to have to continue weighing yourself. And if you see that you're not losing weight anymore, you have to reduce your calories because you're burning less calories. And the easiest way to do this, in my opinion, is to eat a nutrient-dense, low-caloric food diet, mostly coming from whole foods, and stay in the moderate caloric deficit, right? So like we show you to do in our book, I would start creating my diet around my protein intake, right? So protein is extremely important to retain your muscle, and it's also saturating a lot. Typically, we want to be somewhere close to 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Protein has 4 calories per gram. You will have to take that into account if you calculate how many calories you can eat per day, right? The rest of the calories you can fill up really more or less as you wish. I always say that you should at least have 20% of healthy fats. They're pretty important for hormone balance. But then it's really up to you, as long as you stay in a caloric deficit. I, for example, eat protein with every meal. My protein comes mostly from lean meats, fish, protein powder, eggs, beans, and egg whites. And I eat like red meat 2 to 3 times a week on average, but smaller portions. And my fats are coming usually from a lot of vegetables, fatty fish, eggs, seed, nuts, olives, vegetable oils, avocado. I, for example, eat a handful of nuts every day, right? And my rest of the diet is typically more like carbohydrate rich. I eat a lot of whole white breads, I eat rice, sweet potatoes, I eat a lot of fruit, potatoes, ton of vegetables, right? That is me, right? I am a big eater, and if I would eat the same portion sizes with like fatty foods, keep in mind that fat has 7 calories per gram and not just 4, then I would probably overeat. I think it's a good idea for most people to get your energy through whole foods and nutrient-rich low-caloric foods like fruit, vegetable, meats, etc. But the thing is, you also need to enjoy yourself. And that's what a lot of people get wrong about dieting. I, for example, also love pastries or red bean buns. I love red bean buns. And I can't resist. And I often have a small cookie or like a red bean bun after dinner. And when I was losing weight, I replaced some of that with like low calorie, like protein powder and yogurt or whatever, right? As long as this is part of your caloric count per day and you don't go overboard with it, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's a learning experience because you also take responsibility for your decision to eat this, right? So it's actually a big transformation that's going on over time. Sustainable weight loss should be slow and consistent. Create your diet around protein intake, my recommendation, and then see what you like. Enjoy your diet, right? And try to stay in a caloric deficit. That will definitely get you to your weight loss goal. So the third point I want to make is your social setup. So a lot of people think that willpower keeps you in the game of weight loss, but that is not true. What keeps you in the game is joy and support. You need to enjoy your transformation, you need to enjoy your diet, and you need to have the support groups. That also means that you can't beat yourself up if you decide to eat a cookie or if you decide to break with your diet one day. You rather should own your decision to eat that cookie. It also means that you need to find like-minded people, and it might be even true that you have to identify and distance yourself from certain people, so-called enablers. We haven't talked about them a lot on this channel, but those are often very close family members or very close friends or your partner, and people that, because they want to help you, they see you suffering and they want to help you, they enable a very unhealthy lifestyle, very unhealthy diet. Those can be very hard decisions to make if those people are not in your corner. And that is where you would need potentially your willpower, but also potentially help. And then that leads me to my fourth point. I also want you to envision what are you going to do with your new life. Losing weight is usually not enough of an aim, right? Like you can tell yourself, oh, I want to lose 66 pounds. It's a very hard change. Even if you know why you lose weight, for example, for health reasons, you're diabetic, right? For many people, that's not good enough of a reason to keep you in the game. And I'm sorry that I say that, but for many people, that is just true. What you need to envision is, what am I going to do with my new life that I want to have? For me, it was very simple. I wanted to go for runs again, right? Which I wasn't able to do without, panting and being exhausted from carrying around all this extra weight. And I wanted to also to reach my shoelaces again without shoving my stomach into my lungs. So everyone has a higher goal. Those higher goals don't have to be sophisticated. They can be very normal goals. But something that you can enjoy and that you want to enjoy, because the key to all of this is consistency. Consistency beats intensity at any time in the weight loss game. And to be consistent, you need to have a firmly set goal. So, what does it mean for you? Well, first of all, you need to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight. And exercise and dieting, they do work together. You most likely have to change your diet a lot, focusing more on whole foods and less on junk foods, right? But there's a lot more to it. You also want to find a social environment that supports you. And most critically, I want you to enjoy the journey. If you're at 50 or 40% body fat, then every pound of fat you lose will make an impact on your health. So the journey is not for nothing, even if you're never going to get to your 20%. And then more importantly, what will you enjoy that you can't enjoy now? Make that your goal. because that will create consistency, and consistency is the key. Take accountability and responsibility for your actions. Own if you eat that cookie, right? That will lead to better values, to more compassion for yourself and others, and eventually to a better version of yourself. And that is true growth. And I hope you found this helpful. I really appreciate all of you who have subscribed to my channel and watch me trying to become a YouTuber. It's pretty early in the morning here and I'm struggling. And thanks for being part of my journey. And for all who haven't, please subscribe to my channel. It really goes a long way. I see you next time. I'm out.